Hey, great to see everyone here for another GRIP-Birkman Coaches Cafe. I'm really excited again about our discussion as we kick off the new year, talking about this whole idea of sharing and how that contributes to our team building. And I'm especially happy to have Jen Vernum with us. To get the discussion started, for the first several minutes, we'll just kind of have a interview type dialogue with Jen, and then we'll open up the mics for the rest of you to join in with your comments, questions, or applications as we talk about what the significance is of how this applies to us as GRIP-Birkman coaches. Jen, your title again with Providence?
Manager of Organizational Transformation. And
Organizational Transformation.
Yeah, and Providence is quite a large healthcare provider on the West Coast. So John and I actually both work for the Oregon region. So we are responsible for thinking about change strategies for Oregon.
Change strategies and helping teams and team leaders to adapt to change.
Yep.
And in this season, that's pretty significant as change is hitting us nonstop for the last couple of years.
Yeah. And we haven't been able to be as strategic as we want to. Right now, we're sort of in the reaction mode. So That's been frustrating for our team, I think, to not be able to do as much of the kind of how do we lay the groundwork for change. Now we're just right in the middle of, one thing after another.
Well, this particular subject, I think, would be very pertinent in your setting, as it is for all of us. This idea of masks that we wear when we are in a team setting, how we obscure perhaps ourselves and our own thoughts, our deepest thoughts, our deepest feelings that we might be reluctant to share with other people. So let's dive right in and talk some about the article that you've written for us. Fantastic article, by the way. Thank you. Well thought through. This whole idea of vulnerability and that relating to our brokenness. I want to get to that as we start out talking about the idea of masks in general, why we wear masks. And you pointed out that it's become more upfront in our thinking in the last couple of years. But this whole idea of mask wearing really has a very long history. We wear masks to hide ourselves from other people, right? And you talked about how I like the way you framed it, because you talked about why it is so frightening for us to allow other people to know us as we really are. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, so just to paint a little bit more of a picture in my worldview, I live on the West Coast. So on the West Coast is, a lot of Native American heritage. Pacific Northwest Coast Indians is kind of a genre of Indians. And when I was in grade school, we would learn about their artwork. And in college, we would talk about kind of the cultural significance of their practices. And so one of the things we learned about was mask making and the process of wearing a mask during celebrations, kind of participating in ceremonial dances and what it meant to the person who was the dancer wearing this mask. And these masks were huge. If you go into museums now, they're sometimes 3 feet long and they're made out of cedar. I can't imagine how heavy they are to put on. But when a person puts on that mask, they're putting on the persona of an animal or a spirit that they are trying to emulate. And they're trying to take on that power and those qualities of whatever image they're bearing. And I think in our world today, it's really appealing to think, if I put on this thing, I can be what I want to be in my own power, in my own ability. I think the other thing that's interesting about this too, and I was up late last night thinking about this. This did not keep me up late, but I was up late and my mind was thinking. And I think one of the pieces that is kind of compelling is that in those tribes, they learned those dances from their parents. They learned them from their society, their culture, the expectations of the people around them. So to pull that thread, what are the things that we're trying to take on our own shoulders, the weight that we're putting on because we think we need to be good enough because of the norms and the expectations that are maybe put on us by our families, by our societies, the communities we're in. I don't know if that's too much of a stretch, Larry. What do you think?
Well, yeah, and it sounds like what you're talking about is trying to pretend that we are someone or put up a false front to make people believe that we are something that we really are not. A fear to just be who we are.
Right. Right.
And
Instead of who we want to be, who God made us, as he made us.
yeah, so the first step to that perhaps is accepting me as I am. This is the me that God has made me. Granted, given my background, my experiences, how I have made choices that have contributed to this, but right now this is who I am. Maybe I'm going to be someone different. I hope I'm going to be someone different in the future. But right
Right.
now, this is who I am.
Right. Warts and all.
Warts and all, yeah. But we're still afraid to share that with people because of how we think they might respond to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we are not willing to share with them, how can we expect them to share with us?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah. So really, so as you start in that kind of center of this concept, then I think the first thing is, do we have a right view of who we are and in relationship to God and how God sees us? And if we get, at one point when I was writing the article, one of the subtitles I wanted to put on was step one, let's get our own heads on straight, right? Let's first figure out for ourselves how, our view of who we are in the world. And everything sort of flows out from that, I think.
okay, yeah. First, getting my head on straight. Then, uh, could it be that sometimes we aren't even aware of the fact that we're wearing a mask? Then,
I mean, that's a really interesting thing. Again, if you think about the expectations we've been sort of marinating in our whole lives, maybe we do, forget to think about, okay, is this a biblical expectation, or is this something that's been an accessory we've kind of hung on afterwards?
yeah. I mean, thinking about the reality right now of if I've been wearing a mask all day and I get in the car and I'm driving home and I may be 10 or 15 minutes down the road before I realize, oh, I don't have to wear my mask now. I'm in the car. But it's become such a part of my daily
Yeah.
life that I almost forget that it's there.
Yep.
And
And taking the mask, okay, so sorry, we're maybe taking this analogy way too far, but in
yeah,
today's world, I was just complaining 2 days ago to somebody about, I wonder how long it's going to take for me to be able to figure out how to take off my mask and leave my glasses on because everything's tangled up in something else.
yeah.
And so, as we think about taking off the mask, we forget, but it also takes time and effort. I could go into why I was up late last night, but that would take too much time. We don't have time to talk through that. So, I think that might be another piece.
Well, you mentioned this verse though from Ephesians 4:25. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. That whole thing of feeling like I can trust you because we are part of the same body, that's really hard to get to because of maybe it is the egocentric thing that you mentioned. Maybe it is because I don't want to be hurt, or I've been burned before. I have opened up and been vulnerable to people and been burned before. I don't want to be burned again. So I don't feel the unity with other people because of the fact that I'm distancing myself as I'm wearing my mask. Does that seem to ring true? Yeah.
Yep. And I think too, not remembering that when I put on my mask, the group is affected by that.
Yeah.
Even though I think I'm, subconsciously or consciously, I think that I'm doing pretty good with my mask. I've applied it pretty well. People see that. They notice something's not quite there. It's not quite authentic.
Do you think people really want to be that open? Deep down, is there a desire to really want to be known that well?
I think so. I mean, maybe I'm a little too altruistic, but I think we can probably all think about times when we have been known
Yeah.
and felt like we've been understood and how satisfying that feels.
So let me ask you another question without bringing names or time periods or anything like that in to identify people. But have you ever had a leader? Have you ever been part of a team where your leader set such an example of vulnerability that we're talking about from their own brokenness that they really created a team where it felt like a safe place to do that?
Yeah, I have a funny story. One of the person who mentored me in change management, um, she and she felt comfortable enough to be transparent, and I had come from a place where transparency was not valued. Um, and so I just remember I was probably in my early 30s and going to a meeting, and someone said something that was frustrating, and she just kind of, I mean, it wasn't, it created the right tone. She just sort of threw her head on the table, like, I can't believe that we are still at this point. And I remember thinking, wow, that was transparent. I can't believe that she felt so comfortable to present herself in that way. Was it professional? Probably not. Was it something that I do? John, I don't think you've ever seen me do that in a meeting, but it was setting a tone of, okay, I don't have to be polished all of the time. I can say what I really think at the appropriate times, which I hope we get into that part of the article too, because I don't
Yeah.
think we maybe emphasize that as much as it maybe deserves.
Yeah, in fact, I was headed there. That's a great segue to that because is there perhaps a time when we give too much information? We're more vulnerable than we ought to be. You
Right.
know, this generation with Facebook and everything, people just spilling out absolutely every detail of their life. Is that too much?
Yeah, I think, and I was a counselor once at a church camp, and we used to, the staff used to talk laughingly about the campfire times, and that the kids would just kind of feed off of each other, and it became a time of what we called top that testimony. Like,
Yeah.
I can do you one better. You were down and out on the street, but I was drunk. And these kids were 11. So, I mean, I'm just laughing. That was not really their case. But, how can I stir up my story because I want that attention? And that's a really a raw feeling. And I think sometimes we get a little more sophisticated in why we might share inappropriately at different times. But to really, again, getting that head on straight, why is it that I want to share this now? Is it because it's going to help and edify the group? Is it because it's going to be a block for me and I can't get past it if we don't talk about it? And I can't be a full contributor if we don't talk about this? Or is this something that maybe I do need to deal with in a different way,
Okay.
and get my needs met in a different way? Because so kind of taking that mature view of, and the 30,000-foot view of, if I talk about this now, is it gonna bring about something that's edifying and helpful to the group?
Then two things. Number one, for leaders, setting the example. But number two, for the participant and thinking from the standpoint of the participant, what if I have a leader who is not setting that example? What can I do if I'm a leader for the team to try and build this vulnerable kind of sharing in the team for the purpose of building unity? And what could I do as a participant in the team if my team leader's not setting that example for us?
Well, I think so. As a leader, I think it can't all happen in a group. So, making sure that you do have real, authentic connections with people individually, I think is helpful. If you're leading a large group, obviously you might not be able to do that with everyone, but how do you make people feel safe with you one-on-one? And so then when you come together, it's natural to be safe and authentic.
Yeah.
I think also modeling your authenticity in a way that people can see takes some personal sacrifice, takes some personal risk. So by talking about this in this group, I'm risking this. And I think even narrating for people, I'm going to bring this up, even though I'm a little nervous to do that. I'm not quite sure if this is the safe thing to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. I think those things can help. We've read some articles in the past that have talked about the value of not just modeling, but talking about what you're modeling, because people might not realize you're modeling something if you don't tell them, right? So that as a leader, I think that's one way that you can go about it. And as a participant, again, that prayerful, I think, consideration, looking at where the leader wants to take the group, so trying to support that direction, and then again, kind of taking some risks, starting small at first, I think.
And what about from the participant standpoint then, if my leader's not doing that?
Yeah, if my leader's not doing that, I think, oh gosh, is it time to pivot to the audience yet? Can we ask them? I don't know that there's a one pat answer. Is the leader not doing that, but you feel comfortable with them one-on-one? Maybe the leader can be encouraged by you doing the same thing. We can all be kind of, informal, show leadership qualities, informally in that way. That would be one thought. I think prayer is really important. If this is a group that is trying to bring about God's work, then asking God to help in this gap that you see, I think, is a pretty effective approach.
Mm-hmm. Leading from the middle, leading from behind.
Yeah.
Just by example.
Yeah. And prayer.
And if we take that definition of leadership, that leadership is influence, then you can still exert your leadership even though you don't have the position. Right.
And then again, self-monitoring. Why do I want to bring this up? Do I want to bring this up because I'm angry about something that, am I trying to, get somebody, or, for my own purposes, or is this vulnerability going to help?
So coming back to that other idea of you've got to find some balance there, I imagine, of being careful not to share too much that makes other people feel uncomfortable because you're just wide open with everything and they're not ready to be as open as you are.
Right. And I think, again, as a participant in a group, even making suggestions of, hey, next time we get together, what if we do it? What if we start with lunch, and then opening it up with kind of getting to know you types of questions, and making that point of helping the conversation go in a place that sort of softens the ground for authenticity.
Yeah, and I know in the article you said that a potluck dinner does not constitute real sharing automatically, but I have been a part of a group where we did have that situation where the leader was not the example setter in terms of sharing, but we had someone with the gift of hospitality in the group who would say, hey, everybody, I'm just inviting everybody over for a social gathering on Friday night. Let's get together and we'll play some board games. And, helping to build a sense of unity in the team by just getting together in an informal setting. And, when we walked in, the very first instructions we were given were, now, let's see if we can have an entire evening without bringing work into the meeting. Can we have a social gathering that is strictly a social gathering, and we can talk about anything in the world except work? And it was a challenge, because our whole lives together was built around what we did at work. So we had to find other things to share with each other outside of work, and that started to build some of that openness.
And I think there, as I mentioned, there are things online. Our team has these little poker chips that have questions, funny questions, that kind of prompt that. And, we culled through the poker chips and pulled out the ones that were inappropriate. That's a little note to keep in mind, but the ones that we thought would be accessible to everyone. One of them was, have you ever been arrested? Well, we probably don't want to bring that up at work. So we put that one aside.
Yeah.
But even just, pull out your phone and scroll back to the most recent, to one of your favorite photos and show your photo. I mean, it can be anything but I think you're right. It can be helpful to have somebody give you some prompts so you don't stall out on, well, we've always only talked about work. So what are we going to talk about today?
Yeah. So that I guess, the final thoughts before I do open the mic up for everybody else is trying to stimulate people to think in terms of what can I do. There are some steps that we can take, regardless of where you are positionally in the team. There are some things that we can do that can set an example of vulnerability, sharing from our brokenness, so that we can actually build unity in the team. And that's going to result in a team being much more effective, much more productive. And I guess that's the thing. Do we see that teams really are more productive when they are doing this?
I mean, I think yes. If you have a team that you look forward to being around because they're your tribe, they're your people, they know who you are, you're gonna show up in a different way than if it's I got to go do this because I said I was going to do it, and it's really not. We get something. We become stronger
Yeah.
and are fed when we're in more of that fellowship place.
Well, speaking of sharing, I don't want to hog all the time. I want to give the other guys the opportunity to share or some of their thoughts or their questions. I can see some of the contemplative looks on your faces. And would love to have you guys, if there are questions, comments, if this stimulated some thought you'd like to share with the group, then now is the time for us to open up and share.
This idea of masks and this idea of vulnerability, you did mention it or alluded to it, Jen, really boils down to this issue of trust, right? And how do we develop trust? And I think the two scenarios that we've talked about here, where the leader is demonstrating that versus where the leader is not, at the core of the leader demonstrating, I think, is that notion of a vulnerability that can admit a mistake or can talk about a failure or something that didn't work well. Because as soon as you open that up as a possibility for discussion, you take all the pressure off everybody else having to maintain that sense of always good, always whatever it happens to be, right? And the beauty of that is that if you're the team member and it's not something that's being kind of cultivated within the team, there's still nothing to stop you from sharing that, right? And it takes a lot of pressure off a team when somebody, hopefully the leader, but somebody is prepared to admit a mistake, talk about being wrong or making a bad, whatever it happens to be. And as soon as that starts to happen, then hopefully the responses to that are such that it opens up the space for more of that kind of disclosure, which means then we are actually being more real with each other, i.e. less of the mask and even that comes down to an identity thing, right? Like how, do I label myself based on my weaknesses? Do I label myself based on my strengths? Do I have to show that in order for me to be able to be seen in a light that I feel comfortable with? Like there's all kinds of things we could talk about there, but I do like the idea of that, drilling it back down to that notion of trust and how we cultivate that.
Well, so and where that takes me, Les, is sort of thinking through how, what is trust based on? It's either I trust that you're going to do your job, sort of a task orientation, that you deliver on what you say you're going to deliver, or I trust you because of my relationship. Or I trust you because we've been around for a long time. But if you think of the first two, that trust in the task is, is it okay for me to say that I made a mistake or that I didn't perform perfectly in this task without asserting blame to someone else, but really owning that? And the second one relationally would then be, am I okay in saying that I screwed up relationally with us, or that I have weaknesses in that. And so kind of, again, if I were to take this all the way back to the Birkman side of the GRIP-Birkman and to say, okay, if I know I have more of a task orientation or I have more of a people orientation around the way that I'm going to formulate my trust, can I lean into the downside of that? can I lean into, if I know I focus in on tasks, can I focus in on the fact that I make mistakes in the task? If I know I focus in on the relationship, can I focus in on the fact that that I have weaknesses, that I have flaws as an individual, and then when I get really good, then can I do the reverse of that? Even though I'm more relationally driven, can I trust you with the mistakes that I made in the task and trust that our relationship is still going to be okay in that? So I think that's a really interesting frame, a really important point to pull back to less in that. So.
Yeah, because I think it's that whole idea of vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm.
And use the example of the task thing, living up in the red quadrant, right? Sometimes the vulnerability is that I didn't do the task well. Sometimes the vulnerability is that I shouldn't have been focused on the task right now because we needed to spend more time thinking. We needed to honor the space that the people on the team that live in the blue live in, or whatever it happens to be, right? But again, at the core of that, it's that notion of vulnerability, that I'm prepared to acknowledge that whether it's a performance-based thing or a perception thing, I did not function well there. And by stating that, I take a lot of pressure off the other members of the team, because inherently, I think people come into a team feeling like I have to perform.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I love that. I love the going to the personality and where would we naturally see success and failures based on the lens of our personality. Another lens we have is the work that's important to the team. So John and I work on a team that's internal consultants. Internal consultants. We trade in trust and credibility of our leaders of our organization. So I think one of the things we've done pretty well, and it's been set for us, I didn't originate this, but there's a couple leaders I can't work well with. And my team knows it because we talk about it. And we don't talk about it like it's a heavy, awful thing, but just, oh yeah, if this is an assignment with her, then John, you probably should go work with her because it's going to go better. And so I think we've set a tone where it's okay to make a mistake in something as important as what we trade in, the trust and credibility of our team. And by doing that, to your earlier question, Larry, we are more productive. It's a lot better than us pretending that reality didn't exist.
Okay, so I think
mind.
we got most of that. When in your case with that illustration that you've given us, Jen, where you know that you're more productive because being vulnerable with John on the team and the rest of your team to say, I know I don't relate well to that person. We just don't G-haul right now. So it's better for them, better for us, better for everyone if, John, you go and you consult with that team so that we can be productive. But that requires some admission on your part that you can't be all things to all people. John, I'll get you to respond to that since Jen's dropping out a little bit. I think her internet may be spiking on us.
Yeah, I think it's true. And I think then when you take that then to the next level, then you're also looking at probably what will end up being our topic next month, which is the idea of connecting, which is living in interdependence, which requires then at the end of the day, there's a self-awareness to get to that interdependence that actually then allows us to sculpt roles based on our strengths and weaknesses and how we've actually been designed. But I think to not start from a place of trust, you can't do it, right? Without it, we're all wearing these masks then that put up this facade of, no, I can make that work, I can do that, right? And sort of this posturing as opposed to this is the reality. So, getting to that space of authentic sharing saves so much time, frankly, and saves so much heartache in the way that we're even approaching team from a very practical perspective.
I a couple of times have been with pastors of churches in some settings where we have been talking about this whole idea of vulnerability and thinking in terms of friendship even with people that we work with, and where this pastor has said, I cannot afford to have a friend. I cannot have a friend. Because thinking of this one guy in particular. He said, I tried to make a friend with a deacon one time, and then he used everything I shared with him against me, and ultimately I had to leave the church because things that I shared with him, he ended up spilling the beans to everybody else. So coming back to that idea of trust, I think there is a sense in which our trust, or we build trust based on our trustworthiness. When a leader demonstrates to the team, I am worthy of your trust, I will honor your trust, and they do that by sharing themselves. I'm going to share with you, I'm going to open up to you, not knowing if you're really trustworthy or not, but I'm telling you, this is my way of telling you I am going to be trustworthy. Excuse me for a little earthquake there. This is my way of telling you that I am going to be trustworthy with the things that you share with me. And I think that's important, that even for the team leader, coming back to the idea of Jesus with his own disciples, at the very end where he said, I call you friends now. We've had this 3 years of building this relationship, and we have become intimate. And I've shared really openly with you guys, and I expect you to do the same thing now.
And they still betrayed him. And that was not a failure for him. And I think that's important because I tend to want to hedge my bets. I want to make sure that if I'm sharing, I have a backstop that's safe. In reality, we all have, I think, on this call, a backstop that's safe, that we, our identity is already settled. We're already confirmed, we're part of his family, and that's not in jeopardy. But there's still that worldly reality of, if we do this, we can get hurt. And that's not, I can't solve that problem. But maybe the hurt is okay. Maybe the hurt is part of the process too.
And I think that takes us all the way back to the concept simply of stewardship, of that I don't own the relationships. I'm a steward of the relationships that the Lord has entrusted to me for this time. And fundamentally, if I can take that view of relationships, there's a lot less risk for me involved in that than if I'm coming from a risk perspective. If I understand that my job is just to steward those relationships as best I can, and the results of the relationship ultimately are still up to Christ. They're still up to him in that. I wanted to go back to one of the questions that you posed to Jen that I'd love to hear a couple other people's thoughts on as well, which is the idea of, when I'm not the leader, then what? How do we do this, right? Because we all have rooms where we're not the leader, where we want to establish this, where we want to see it more. What do we do in those instances to create that space? And one of the things that I thought of, and actually, Jen, it goes back to some things that we've been able to do over the past few years, is the idea of not doing it alone, even when you're not the person that's in charge of the room. But when there are, at least, we talk about the idea of modeling, and sometimes if you're on your own, that's really vulnerable. But if you can have one person alongside that sort of views the world the way that you do, or that you are comfortable being vulnerable with, which in some ways even provides that security blanket, if you will, like if I mess up, it's okay, or if I accidentally overshare or whatever, they have my back. It changes things, and the way that two people can actually really shift the dynamic of a room. And so even if it's not that one person, who's one other person that you could connect with to begin to model certain things in a room, even in slight interactions or in the way that you play off of each other in your interaction, to model some of that authenticity?
Yeah, I think that's really important, John, to find that one person that you really can connect with, and when the two of you are working at, that's the beginning then of spreading through the team. That's the you become.
Yeah, we've even had, I think, people come to our meetings and say, "Whoa, this is a meeting I haven't had before. They're way too what's the right word? Not glib, or we tease each other, and we joke around, and I think people are like, oh wait, I got to get adjusted to this. But it's a lot easier to set a tone of kind of just comfort if you've got a couple people on the same page.
But you can only do that if you know each other.
Yeah.
That comes
Yeah.
with time, building the relationships, right? And we are in the relationship building business. And Ken and Wayne, particularly, thinking about you guys because you have done a lot of coaching and consultation with churches and church leadership teams, ministry teams, pastors, and talking about the idea of we're doing team building and we're also doing one-on-ones, right? So I just feel like both of you guys probably have a couple of examples that you ought to share with us from some of that without violating confidences, obviously, but just in some generalizations that you could share with us from some of your observations.
I think so. One of the hardest things I think for most leaders is leading from the second chair. I mean, you're not the leader. You can't control how the team is going to function. And so you've got to figure out how to influence the team or how to open that vulnerability without the authority to say, stop the meeting. This is the way it's got to happen. Jen, I was so impressed with the text that you mentioned in your article. You said this is a recent text from one partner in ministry. Can I ask you to give me some feedback? Can you tell me when you think I'm part of the problem and not part of the solution? I just don't think my radar is working well right now. And I found myself just stopping at that and saying, that second chair, third chair, fifth chair person, that person who's not leading the team, has opened the door in this incredible way, being vulnerable and opening the door for the leader to speak into their lives and to develop a whole new level. That person is going to change the dynamics of that team just by that text alone and the willingness to be heard. So often I think especially in the church, working with, your illustration of the pastor who doesn't want a friend, Larry, is just so telling. Even in the context of the family of God, we often are so careful about presenting the right picture, of looking right, of making sure that we don't somehow demean, our authority. And in doing so, we actually bind our ability. We tie up our ability to be the family of God, to be the open and supportive of one another and helping each other grow to all new levels. Jen, I thought when I saw that text, I want that person on my team. I don't know who they are. I don't care. I want that person on my team.
Well, this is being recorded, so I won't go into too many details
Right.
about that person, but that came out of a lot of painful growth. That I think the things that led her to the point where she was equipped to send that text, if she had known those things were going to happen, she would not have wanted them to happen, even knowing that she would have grown through them. So we have these responsibilities as grown-ups and as children of God, that we have time on this world to spend in a certain way. Do we spend it in making those situations into something that helps us be a contributor for his good? Or, do we, she had a choice to make and she made a great choice. She still has the journey ahead of her. Her radar is off. She does need help. So, the fact that she wants to get that and is a statement of how I think her worldview, where she puts her priorities.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think we in the church are the worst at that, because we have this idea that if I'm not perfect, somehow my relationship with God isn't right, or the power of the Holy Spirit in me is not quite right, or I'm not using my gift right. I mean, we have all these things that actually, if we're not careful, I think Satan can use them to hinder the very thing that God wants to happen in a team. And it's heartbreaking.
Let me share another example with you. When we joined our previous church, we invited our pastor over because we wanted to get to know him. And, probably not a big surprise for those of you that know me, wanted to know what his strategies were for ministry. So we had him over. Then we had another group of people over because we wanted to start a small group. And so we wanted to see, kind of talk with them about what that would look like and et cetera, et cetera. So we just kind of started to create this space where people would come to our house. And that was wonderful. We wanted that. One of my friends from that congregation told me one time that she loved coming over to my house because it made her feel okay about her own housekeeping. So what does that tell you? That my housekeeping was not stellar, right? But she was being sincere. It was like a complete backhanded compliment, but I'm taking it, that the fact that I did not spend my days trying to gussy up the house to make her think that I was something that I'm not, she benefited from that. So sometimes showing that raw side, that, unswept floor or unresolved issue in your life can help someone else in a place that they need help.
Yeah. Wayne, I see the wheels turning.
Well, just thinking through, I do a lot of outside intervention work with groups and teams, and just thinking of 2 or 3 opportunities. It wasn't a very thick book, but it was a pretty good book about Who Moved My Cheese many years ago. Mm-hmm. And coming into, if it's especially a new team or a group that needs to make some shifts, one of the things I'll do is I'll try to find a way to move the cheese. And so for like one group that I was a newcomer to, leading from the middle, I came to the first meeting and I just sat and observed and watched and listened. I came to the second meeting and I sat in someone else's chair, which almost killed the whole meeting. And, so, in a group, how can, this idea of being vulnerable and things, how can you, as an outside person working in, and I guess probably John and Jen, you guys work with a lot of different teams around the healthcare facility and stuff. How can you come in and move the cheese around a little bit that creates this idea of vulnerability and kind of unsettles things, because sometimes we become too settled. And so how can we unsettle things so that then things can shift and make something new form? I remember in one team when I was with a missions organization several years ago, and I oversaw several teams, and I went in to do strategic planning session with this team. And it was fascinating. I had actually led that team several years before that. And so I knew most of the players fairly well. And so I'm in with this team and I'm supposed to be leading the strategic planning thing. And every time this one person didn't like something, and this was a really sharp person. I mean, this guy went to an Ivy League school. And every time someone said something contrary to what he thought, his head would go back and he would just roll his eyes. And it was very easy to see it. And so what we did at that time, we stopped and we laid some ground rules about how we're going to be vulnerable and the behaviors that we wanted to embrace in that team setting. And that's one of the things that I try to do when I'm working with new teams is setting ground rules that actually will provide a safe place for people to be vulnerable and encourage people to be vulnerable is probably a very proactive thing that we can do in order to help that, people take the mask off and allow for that.
So thinking about that, Wayne, like as a consultant coming from the outside, can we set that tone ourselves by being vulnerable as the facilitator of that meeting? Like, you're the leader in that meeting, in that team build to start with.
Sure.
So what do you think, folks? I mean, do we have a responsibility as facilitators in those team builds to be vulnerable ourselves to set the example?
Yeah. Let me give an illustration. So I started this a couple of years ago, doing intentional interim pastorates. And that's where I find myself in that world now. And of course, an intentional interim is about leading a church through intensive change, healing wounds, all that kind of stuff, but leading the church through intensive change, which is uncomfortable and unsettling. And what I realized is it's also very uncomfortable and unsettling for me, because I don't know how this is going to go. And, part of it is my next intentional interim, whether I get another one or not, is based upon how well I do in this one.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if these people are going to work with me or going to work against me. And so this last intentional interim I did, when we had our first congregational meeting, because I always tell people we're going to talk about change and transition. That's uncomfortable. Look at your neighbor now. Say it's okay to be uncomfortable. The whole fold your arms, change your arms, do all that kind of stuff. And I just said, let me just tell you that I'm probably more uncomfortable about all of this than you are. And I just laid out 4 or 5 things that I was really, I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know you guys, all these different things. And it was so fascinating because the thing I heard constantly was, Wayne, it's okay to be uncomfortable. And they started saying that back to me and the leadership team and things. So I'm kind of uncomfortable with it's okay to be uncomfortable. We're okay with that. And so, by laying it out there and just putting it on the table, that it's okay to be uncomfortable, and then sharing my own ways I'm uncomfortable, just really open the door up for the smaller groups and the smaller teams, then to be able to talk about that and be uncomfortable.
Wayne's reminding me of I think one of the places that our discomfort comes from is controversy and varying opinions, right, on things. I see masks this way, you might see it a different way. And so full transparency, prior to COVID, we had another controversy. Can you believe there was something prior to COVID? And it was about the border wall in Texas. And Providence has a it's a long story. We don't have time to get into it. I found myself on a short-term trip to McAllen, Texas, to look at the border wall, work in a relief center for folks that were in kind of a holding zone that had crossed the border. Okay, super loaded conversation. I was asked to come and present to not just the adult Sunday school class, but the elderly adult Sunday school class at my conservative Baptist church about my trip to the border wall. That was a hot mess of loaded stuff, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
I was really uncomfortable, and I'm a woman presenting in front of an adult elderly Sunday school class at a conservative Baptist church. It just keeps piling up. So I went there and I said, I am uncomfortable with this. I'm nervous to talk to you guys about my experience because this is a mess. Problem solved. As soon as I said that, the whole group was like eating up everything I had to say. There were people that said, wow, you really challenged my thinking on this, instead of the finger wagging that I had anticipated. And part of that was probably me making it up in my mind that it was going to be a bigger thing than it really was. But it sure made me feel better. And I think it built some empathy so that they wanted to hear what I had to say. They wanted me to be successful. And that opened up their minds a little bit to what I had to share, to the struggles that I was having with the topic.
Right. Yeah. And what I've learned in teams, and I love doing the team building stuff. I mean, that's part of why I just, eat up the GRIP-Birkman stuff is that to be a high impact functioning team, you have to know how to have healthy conflict, because if you don't have healthy conflict, you will never function at a high level, because conflict is just
be transparent if you can't really tell what you think. Yeah.
Right. And so, how do we learn to handle conflict? And I've actually led teams and been a part of teams where there was never any conflict. Everybody just kind of sat there. And it's like, wow, this is, I don't even want to come back to this.
Like those people who are in their marriage and they say they never fight.
Yeah,
That's
really?
suspect.
Yeah, really? So I'll actually, and this was the whole idea of moving the cheese, find a way to create a conflict. And then how do we work through that? Now, okay, let's stop and let's work. Because, teams stay at a low level because we think conflict is unhealthy. Where actually conflict is neutral, and how we deal with it is either healthy or unhealthy. Mm-hmm. And so how do we learn to deal with conflict? How do we learn to have conversation that has different point of views, and do that in a healthy way? And that actually creates the idea of vulnerability.
So Wayne, the other thing is, if you are going to throw a conflict out there, be sure you do it with a cap gun and not an atomic bomb.
Yes. Yeah.
I think we have an article idea for Wayne to write on intentional conflict.
Intentional conflict. Yeah. And, at low level, let's keep it low level at that stage. There may be something huge in the background.
Right.
But don't start with that. Start with the baby step things, right?
Yeah.
And that's so, and we have a perfect opportunity with the tools that we've got. GRIP and the Birkman both can help us with that, because we see our differences and our diversity and how we see things from different points of view, and we start a conversation based on the fact that we have different perspectives. And that's the lowest level of conflict, just that we see things from a different perspective. Now let's try to learn what it's like to be in each other's shoes, why you're seeing it this way, and that together we get a stereo vision. We get a better view of the real picture because we are both looking at it from different standpoints, which means we actually start to build dependency and interdependency based on that sharing of different perspectives.
And we don't have to agree at the end of the day, which we just have a problem with that in this society today.
Yeah. Jen, you and I have worked together on a couple of projects now, and I felt that way. We didn't totally agree at the end of the day, but wow, okay, it forced me to see things at least differently, and maybe I didn't come all the way over to your point of view, but I moved.
You'll get there.
Yeah,
that was very good.
The whole thing of growth is painful, right? Mm-hmm. But growth means change. If we're going to grow, something has to change. And that comes from the unbalanced equation of something here needs to change. I'm not satisfied with it the way it is. So something has to change, and that's going to result in growth.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what we're doing in our coaching of individuals and teams when we're doing some GRIP-Birkman coaching. And that probably leads us to a good place to end the hour, guys, because we're at the top of the hour, believe it or not. I think we could go on for another couple of hours discussing this once we really get the gears moving. I appreciate all of your participation. Jen, thank you so much for a really stimulating dialogue. We may need to come back and revisit this subject again very soon. Because
Great. It was fun.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. And I hope this will be useful to all of us as we try to help individuals and teams build unity in the body of Christ so that more people will know Jesus. Thank you again, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye.